The Georgia sun beat down on Fort Benning's parade ground as Lieutenant Maya Chen stepped off the transport bus. At 5'6" and 130 pounds, she looked more like a college student than a soldier. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her uniform was crisp despite the long journey from San Diego. She had requested this transfer. After 6 years of special operations work that couldn't be discussed, Maya wanted something quieter, something normal. The Army had assigned her to train new recruits at the infantry school. On paper, it seemed perfect. What Maya didn't know was that Fort Benning's training battalion had never had a female instructor before, and many of the men stationed there planned to keep it that way. Sergeant First Class Rick Morrison watched from the battalion headquarters window. He was a thick-necked man with 20 years of service, most of it spent right here at Benning. He'd trained thousands of recruits and didn't think much of the modern Army's soft approach. "That's her," he said to the man beside him. "That's the hotshot they're sending us." Captain Davis nodded. He was younger than Morrison, but he'd learned to trust the older sergeant's judgment. "Says here she's got some kind of special operations background. Records are mostly classified." Morrison snorted. "Classified. Right. Probably sat behind a desk somewhere and got a medal for filing paperwork. You know how it is now, Davis. They're pushing women into every role whether they can handle it or not." "Higher-ups say we have to give her a fair chance," Davis said, but his tone suggested he agreed with Morrison. "Oh, we'll give her a chance," Morrison said, a thin smile crossing his face. "We'll give her every chance to prove she doesn't belong here." Maya reported to the battalion commander's office at 1400 hours sharp. Colonel Hendricks was a career officer, tired and counting the days until retirement. He barely looked up from his paperwork when she entered. "Lieutenant Chen reporting for duty, sir," Maya said, saluting crisply. Hendricks returned the salute with less enthusiasm. "At ease, Lieutenant. I'll be frank with you. I didn't request a female officer for my training cadre. This came down from division. But you're here now, so we'll make the best of it." Maya kept her expression neutral. She'd heard worse. "I'm here to do my job, sir. Nothing more, nothing less." "Your job will be assisting with basic combat training. Sergeant Morrison will be your direct supervisor. He's been doing this since before you were born, so I suggest you listen to what he tells you." Hendricks finally looked at her. "This is an infantry training post, Lieutenant. It's not like other assignments. The standards here are high, and the men don't appreciate distractions." "I understand, sir." "Do you? Because these recruits need to learn from people who have actually been in combat, who have carried a wounded buddy under fire, who know what it takes to survive in the real world." He leaned back in his chair. "I see you've got some classified markers in your record, but classification can mean anything these days. It doesn't necessarily mean you've seen action." Maya's jaw tightened slightly, but she said nothing. Her record spoke for itself, even if most of it was redacted. 3 deployments to hostile territories, combat action badges, commendations she couldn't discuss, and a qualification that fewer than a dozen women had ever achieved, but that was buried so deep in her file that men like Hendricks would never see it. "You're dismissed," Hendricks said. "Report to Sergeant Morrison at the training grounds, and Lieutenant, don't expect any special treatment here. You wanted to be treated like one of the boys. Now you've got your wish." Maya found Morrison at the obstacle course, watching a group of recruits struggle through the mud pit. He didn't acknowledge her approach until she was standing right beside him. "So you're Chen," he said without looking at her. "Yes, Sergeant." "Let me tell you how this is going to work, Lieutenant." He finally turned to face her, his eyes cold. "I don't care what your rank says. I don't care what some paper pusher at division thinks. This is my training ground, and these are my recruits. You're here to observe and learn. You will not undermine my authority. You will not coddle these boys. And you will not turn my program into some kind of social experiment. Clear?" "Crystal clear, Sergeant. But with respect, I'm assigned as an instructor, not an observer." Morrison's face darkened. "With respect? You don't know the meaning of respect. You walk in here with your shiny commission and your classified record that probably means you sat in an air-conditioned office somewhere, and you think you can teach my recruits about combat. about sacrifice. Other instructors had gathered now, drawn by Morrison's raised voice. They stood in a loose circle, arms crossed, watching with interest. "I'm not here to cause problems," Maya said quietly. "I'm here to train soldiers." "You're here because some politicians decided we needed diversity points," Morrison shot back. "But let me tell you what's going to happen. These recruits are going to test you. They're going to push you. And when you can't handle it, when you go crying to the colonel about how mean we are, you'll get reassigned to some nice safe desk job. And we can go back to training real soldiers." Maya took a slow breath. She'd been through worse than this, much worse. "I won't be going anywhere, Sergeant. I suggest we find a way to work together." "Work together?" Morrison laughed, and several of the other instructors joined in. "Tell you what, Lieutenant, you want to be taken seriously here. You want to train my recruits. Then you pass my course first." "I've already passed basic combat training, Sergeant, years ago." "Not my course. I'm talking about the full combat instructor qualification. The one we make all new cadre complete. 6 weeks of hell. Running the same obstacles as the recruits, only faster. Longer ruck marches. Harder physical standards. Most male lieutenants wash out. But if you're so confident, if you think your classified record means something, then prove it." The challenge hung in the air. Maya knew it was a trap. Morrison was setting impossible standards, hoping she'd refuse or fail. But refusing would mean losing all credibility before she'd even started. "When do I begin?" she asked. Morrison smiled. "Oh, 600 tomorrow, and Lieutenant, when you fail, don't say I didn't warn you." That evening, Maya unpacked her gear in the small BOQ room she'd been assigned. It was sparse. A bed, a desk, a locker. Through the thin walls, she could hear other officers laughing and talking. None of them had stopped by to introduce themselves. She sat on the edge of her bed and pulled out her phone. There was a text from her former team leader, Commander Sarah Blake. Sarah was one of the few people who knew Maya's full story. "How's the new post?" the message read. Maya typed back, "Challenging. They want to wash me out before I even start." The response came quickly. "Of course they do. You faced worse. Show them what SEAL training really looks like." Maya smiled slightly. Sarah was right. She had faced worse, much worse. 5 years ago, Maya had done the impossible. She'd completed Bud S, the basic underwater demolition SEAL training, and earned her Naval Special Warfare qualification. The training that broke 75% of men who attempted it. The training that involved Hell Week, where candidates ran on 2 hours of sleep over 5 days while instructors pushed them to their absolute limits. Maya had made it through. She'd carried logs on her shoulders until her bones ached. She'd swum in freezing ocean water until her lips turned blue. She'd run with boats on her head and crawled through mud under barbed wire. She'd proven herself against men who had 50 pounds of muscle on her, using technique and determination where she lacked size. And then, after all that, after earning the respect of her instructors and her team, the Navy had quietly buried her achievement. Too controversial, they said. Too political. She was reassigned to naval intelligence, where her skills were wasted on paperwork and analysis. Eventually, she'd transferred to the Army, hopping for a fresh start. Her SEAL qualification had been classified, marked as a special training evolution in her record. Only a handful of people with the right clearances could access it. Men like Morrison and Hendricks would never know. And that was fine with Maya. She'd never wanted glory or recognition. She'd wanted to serve, to make a difference. But if Morrison wanted to test her, she'd give him a test he'd never forget. That night, she ran 10 miles through the Georgia heat. Her body remembered the rhythm of special operations training, the constant physical demands. The mental toughness required to push through pain and exhaustion. As she ran past the training grounds in the darkness, she saw Morrison's obstacle course laid out like a challenge. Walls to climb, ropes to traverse, mud pits to crawl through. She'd conquered harder courses in the Pacific surf. This would be nothing. At 05:30 the next morning, Maya stood at the start of the course in PT gear. Morrison was there with 6 other instructors, all men, all watching her with barely concealed amusement. "Last chance to back out, Lieutenant," Morrison said. "No shame in knowing your limitations." Maya stretched her hamstrings and said nothing. "All right, then. The course record for instructors is 42 minutes. I'll give you an hour. If you can finish in under an hour, I'll consider letting you observe my training sessions. If not, you can go request a transfer to finance or personnel, somewhere more suited to your talents." "Understood, Sergeant." "On my mark," Morrison raised his hand. "Go." Maya exploded forward. The first obstacle was a series of hurdles, then a rope climb, then a wall that required pulling yourself over with upper body strength alone. She attacked each one with precision, using technique to compensate for her smaller size. Morrison watched with his arms crossed. He'd set the bar deliberately high. 42 minutes was the record for male instructors. Most female soldiers could barely complete the course at all, let alone in under an hour. But as Maya moved through the obstacles, his expression changed. She wasn't struggling, she was flowing. Her movements were economical, practiced. When she hit the monkey bars, she crossed them without pausing. When she reached the cargo net, she climbed it like a spider. "She's had training," one of the other instructors muttered. "Real training." "Doesn't matter," Morrison said. "Wait until she hits the mud crawl and the ruck run. That's where size matters." But Maya powered through the mud crawl, her small frame an advantage in the tight space under the barbed wire. And when she strapped on the 40-pound ruck for the final 3-mile run, she settled into a pace that would have impressed a ranger. Morrison checked his watch. 38 minutes. She was going to beat the course record. Impossible. Maya crossed the finish line at 40 minutes and 16 seconds. She was covered in mud, drenched in sweat, but breathing steadily. She'd paced herself perfectly, conserving energy where needed, pushing hard where it counted. Morrison stared at his stopwatch like it had betrayed him. 40 minutes, 16 seconds, he said flatly. That's the second fastest time ever recorded on this course." Maya wiped mud from her face. "Who holds the record?" "I do. 38 minutes, set 15 years ago when I was your age." Morrison's face was red. "Where did you learn to move like that?" "The Army trained me well, Sergeant." "That wasn't Army training. I've seen thousands of soldiers go through Army combat courses. You move like special operations, like Ranger or Special Forces." Maya met his gaze. "Like I said, the Army trained me well. So do I get to be an instructor, or do you have another test for me?" Morrison wanted to argue, to find some reason to disqualify her. But 40 other instructors had watched her run the course. He couldn't deny what they'd all seen. "Report to Training Block Charlie at 0800, he said through gritted teeth. "You'll be shadowing me with the new recruit class, but beating a course doesn't mean you can teach. We'll see how you handle actual soldiers." Maya nodded and headed for the showers. Behind her, she heard the instructors talking in hushed, confused tones. She'd proven she could match their physical standards, but she knew that wouldn't be enough. Men like Morrison didn't give up easily. If anything, she'd just made things harder for herself. The real test was only beginning. The next morning, Maya stood at attention with 5 other instructors as 96 new recruits filed onto the training ground. They were young men, mostly 18 to 22, fresh from civilian life and terrified of everything in their new world. Sergeant Morrison paced in front of them like a predator sizing up prey. "Welcome to Fort Benning," he roared. "For the next 10 weeks, your life belongs to me. You will eat when I say eat, sleep when I say sleep. You will learn to be soldiers, or you will fail and go home to Mama. Do you understand?" "Yes, Sergeant," the recruits shouted back, their voices uneven and uncertain. Morrison continued his speech, the standard drill sergeant introduction that was designed to intimidate and establish absolute authority. Maya had heard variations of it 100 times. She stood silently, watching the recruits' faces, reading their fear and determination. After Morrison finished, he introduced his instructor team. He went down the line, giving each man's name and credentials. When he reached Maya, he paused. "And this is Lieutenant Chen," he said, his tone changing slightly. "She'll be observing our training. The Army, in its wisdom, has decided that we need diversity in our instructor corps. So Lieutenant Chen is here to learn from us about real soldiering. Several recruits exchanged glances. Maya kept her expression neutral, but inside, she was nodding Morrison's choice of words. He deliberately undermined her authority in front of 96 impressionable young men. Now, Lieutenant Chen did manage to pass our obstacle course yesterday, Morrison continued, which was surprising, but running a course and training soldiers are two different things. We'll see how she handles the second part. The message was clear. Don't respect her, don't listen to her, don't take her seriously. The first week of training was designed to shock recruits out of their civilian habits. Long runs before dawn, endless push-ups, instructors screaming in their faces about every minor mistake. It was psychological warfare meant to break them down so they could be built back up as soldiers. Maya was assigned to oversee physical training each morning. Morrison made sure she understood she was to follow his program exactly, with no modifications. On the third day, during a 5-mile run, one of the recruits, a skinny kid named Private Taylor, started falling behind. His face was pale and he was struggling to breathe. Maya dropped back to run beside him. "You okay, Private?" "Yes, ma'am," he gasped, but she could see he wasn't. "When did you last eat?" "Dinner last night, ma'am. I couldn't keep breakfast down this morning." Maya glanced ahead. Morrison was at the front of the formation, setting a brutal pace. She made a quick decision. "Fall out to the side. Walk for 2 minutes, catch your breath, then rejoin. Don't tell anyone I authorized it." Taylor looked grateful and terrified at the same time. But Sergeant Morrison said, "I'm a lieutenant, Private. I outrank Sergeant Morrison. Fall out. That's an order." Taylor stumbled to the side of the road and bent over, hands on his knees. Maya continued running with the main group. 2 minutes later, she glanced back and saw Taylor jogging to catch up, his color better. She thought nothing more of it until after the run, when Morrison pulled her aside. "Did you authorize Private Taylor to fall out during the run?" "He was about to collapse, Sergeant. I gave him 2 minutes to recover." Morrison's face turned red. "You undermined my training. Those recruits need to learn to push through discomfort. You think the enemy is going to give them a water break when things get tough. There's a difference between pushing through discomfort and ignoring signs of heat exhaustion," Maya said. "I made a judgment call." "You made a mistake, and now every recruit in that platoon knows that if things get hard, they can run crying to Lieutenant Chen and she'll give them a pass. You just destroyed their discipline." "I prevented a medical emergency." "You're not a doctor, you're supposed to be an instructor." Morrison stepped closer, using his height to loom over her. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. You're too soft. You don't have the stomach for real training, and now my recruits know it." Maya held her ground. "Your recruits need to learn the difference between legitimate challenges and dangerous conditions. Pushing a dehydrated soldier to collapse doesn't make him tougher. It makes him a casualty." "In your expert opinion," Morrison's voice dripped with sarcasm, "tell me, Lieutenant, in all your years of classified desk work, how many soldiers have you actually trained?" Before Maya could respond, Captain Davis appeared. "Problem here." "Lieutenant Chen is interfering with my training protocols," Morrison said. Davis looked at Maya. "Is that true?" "I prevented a recruit from suffering heat stroke, sir. If that's interference, then yes." Davis sighed. "Lieutenant, Sergeant Morrison has been running this program for 2 decades. I think he knows how to gauge a recruit's limits. In the future, defer to his judgment." "Understood." Maya wanted to argue, but she recognized the futility. "Understood, sir." After Davis left, Morrison smiled coldly. "You're learning, Lieutenant. Now you know how things work here. My training ground my rules. You can either accept that and stay quiet, or you can keep interfering and find yourself reassigned. Your choice." Over the following weeks, the situation deteriorated. Morrison gave Maya the worst assignments: supervising latrine cleaning, inspecting barracks at midnight, doing paperwork that kept her away from actual training. When she was present for instruction, he would openly contradict her in front of the recruits. During weapons training, Maya was demonstrating proper rifle stance when Morrison interrupted. "That might be how they do it in the Navy or wherever you got your classified training, Lieutenant, but this is the Army. We do it this way." He then showed a stance that was nearly identical to Maya's, just to make the point that her instruction didn't matter. The other instructors took their cues from Morrison. They excluded Maya from planning meetings, forgot to tell her about schedule changes, and made jokes at her expense when they thought she couldn't hear. But the worst part was watching the recruits suffer under Morrison's increasingly harsh training methods. He was pushing them harder than necessary, and Maya suspected it was partly to prove a point to her. Several recruits developed injuries that should have been prevented. Others were being verbally brutalized for minor infractions. One evening, Maya found Private Taylor sitting alone behind the barracks, his eyes red. "What's wrong, Private?" He stood quickly. "Nothing, ma'am." "At ease, talk to me." Taylor hesitated, then the words spilled out. "It's Sergeant Morrison, ma'am. He's been riding me hard ever since that run. Calls me weak. Makes me do extra PT while the others rest. Yesterday he made me low-crawl a mile because my boots weren't shined perfectly. I'm trying my best, but nothing I do is good enough." Maya's jaw tightened. Morrison was retaliating against Taylor because she'd helped him. Has he violated any regulations? "No, ma'am, he's just mean, within the rules, but mean. Some of the guys say he's always been tough, but it's worse this cycle, like he's trying to prove something." "Stay strong, Private. You're going to make it through this." After Taylor left, Maya sat in the darkness, thinking. She could report Morrison's behavior, but she had no evidence of actual wrongdoing. Tough training wasn't illegal, and complaining would only confirm every stereotype Morrison had about her, that she was too soft, too emotional, couldn't handle the real Army. She needed a different approach. That weekend, Maya drove to a small gym 30 miles from base. It was run by a former Army Ranger named Marcus Webb, who'd been recommended by a friend. The gym catered to special operations personnel and serious athletes. Webb was a massive man in his 50s, with scars on his arms and a no-nonsense attitude. "You're Chen?" he asked when she introduced herself. "Yes, sir. Heard about you from Sarah Blake. She says you're the real deal. Also says you're having some trouble at Bennying." Maya was surprised. "Commander Blake told you." "We served together 10 years back. She called me, said you might need some help. Said the good old boys are making your life difficult." Webb gestured around his gym. "This is a safe space. Nobody here cares about politics or gender. We care about capability. You want to train here, you're welcome." For the next month, Maya spent every weekend at Webb's gym. She trained with former Rangers, Delta operators, and Marine Recon veterans. They pushed her hard, treated her as an equal, and reminded her why she'd fallen in love with military service in the first place. More importantly, they gave her perspective. "Morrison's scared of you," Webb said one afternoon. "Men like him, they've built their whole identity on being the toughest guy in the room. Then you show up and run his course faster than half his instructors, and suddenly his world doesn't make sense anymore. He's not going to accept you because he can't accept what you represent." "So what do I do?" "You outlast him. You be so good that even his bias can't deny it. And you wait for him to make a mistake, because men like Morrison always do. Their arrogance trips them up eventually." Back at Fort Bennying, Maya settled into a cold war with Morrison. She did her job quietly, documented everything, and waited. She couldn't train the recruits the way she wanted to, but she could be a steady presence. Several of them started seeking her out for advice, which they asked for in whispers when Morrison wasn't around. Private Taylor approached her one evening. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you for that day on the run. Sergeant Morrison's been hard on me, but I've been tougher. I'm not going to quit." "Good, Private. That's the spirit." "Can I ask you something, ma'am? Where did you serve before this? Some of the guys have been wondering. You move different than the other instructors." Maya smiled slightly. "That's classified private." "Right, sorry, ma'am." He hesitated. "It's just, we can tell you know what you're doing, and we wish you were training us instead of just watching." After he left, Maya felt a surge of satisfaction. Morrison could undermine her authority, but he couldn't hide competence from recruits who were learning to recognize it. The breaking point came in week 7 of the training cycle. Morrison had planned a 20-mile ruck march through rough terrain. It was the hardest event of basic training, designed to test endurance and mental toughness. Maya reviewed the weather forecast the night before and saw a problem. Temperatures were supposed to hit 98 degrees with high humidity. Dangerous conditions for a long march with full packs. She brought her concerns to Morrison. "Sergeant, I recommend we postpone the march or move it to early morning. These conditions could cause multiple heat casualties." Morrison didn't even look up from his paperwork. "Your recommendation is noted and dismissed, Lieutenant. These recruits need to learn to operate in adverse conditions." "I understand that, but we can teach that lesson without risking their health. Pushing them in this heat isn't tough training, it's negligent." Now Morrison did look up, his eyes hard. "Are you questioning my judgment again?" "I'm expressing a professional concern, based on safety standards." "Then take your concern to Captain Davis. See how that works out for you." Morrison stood and walked to the door. "The march happens tomorrow at 1400, as scheduled. If you don't have the stomach for it, feel free to stay behind." Maya went to Captain Davis, who listened with visible impatience. "Lieutenant, Sergeant Morrison knows what he's doing. He's run this march in hot weather before. The recruits will have water. We'll have medics standing by. It'll be fine." "Sir, I really think." "That's enough, Lieutenant. I'm getting tired of the friction between you and Morrison. Either learn to work with him or request a transfer. Those are your options." The next afternoon, 96 recruits lined up with 40-pound rucksacks on their backs. The temperature was already 95 degrees. Maya stood with the other instructors, her own ruck loaded, her water bladder full. Morrison gave the command to move out. The first 10 miles went badly. 3 recruits fell out with cramping. 5 more were showing signs of heat exhaustion, pale skin, confusion, unsteady gait. Maya moved among them, offering water from her own supply, trying to keep them going. At mile 12, Private Taylor collapsed. Maya was beside him in seconds, checking his pulse, his pupils. His skin was hot and dry, a bad sign. "Get a medic," she shouted. Morrison jogged over. "Get him up, he's fine." "He's not fine. He needs immediate medical attention." "He needs to toughen up." Morrison reached down to grab Taylor's arm. Maya stepped between them. "Stand down, Sergeant. This recruit is having a medical emergency." "Get out of my way, Lieutenant." "No." They stood face to face, Morrison towering over her, his face purple with rage. The other recruits had stopped marching and were watching. Several instructors hurried over. Captain Davis arrived, breathless from running. "What's going on?" "Lieutenant Chen is refusing to follow orders," Morrison said. "Private Taylor needs immediate evacuation," Maya said, her voice calm but firm. "He's showing signs of heat stroke. His core temperature is critical." Davis looked down at Taylor, who was barely conscious. "Call for an ambulance," he said quietly. "Sir, this is just," Morrison started. "Now, Sergeant." An ambulance arrived 20 minutes later. The medics confirmed Maya's diagnosis: heat stroke. Another 10 minutes without treatment and Taylor could have suffered permanent organ damage or death. The march was canceled. The recruits were loaded onto trucks and returned to base. Private Taylor was hospitalized for 3 days. That evening, Maya was called to Colonel Hendrick's office. Morrison was already there, along with Captain Davis. Hendricks looked exhausted. "Lieutenant Chen, you disobeyed a direct order from your supervisor during a training exercise." "I prevented a soldier's death, sir." "You undermined military discipline and created a situation that could have spiraled into chaos." Hendricks rubbed his temples. "Sergeant Morrison is recommending that you be reassigned for inability to work within the chain of command." Maya had known this was coming, but it still stung. "Sir, I followed proper protocol for a medical emergency. Sergeant Morrison's order to ignore Private Taylor's condition was unlawful." "That's your interpretation," Morrison said. Mine is that you panicked and— Sergeant, that's enough, Hendricks said. He looked at Maya for a long moment. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to request your transfer to another unit. This situation has become untenable. You and Morrison can't work together, and I'm not replacing a senior NCO with 2 decades of experience because a lieutenant with a few years and a classified record thinks she knows better. Sir, that's not fair, Maya said quietly. I've done everything asked of me. I've followed regulations. I've tried to work with Sergeant Morrison despite his open hostility. And when I saved a recruit's life, I get punished for it. You get reassigned to a position where you'll be more effective. Sometimes that's how the Army works, Lieutenant. You're dismissed. Maya saluted and left. Her hands were shaking with anger, but she kept her composure until she reached her quarters. She'd lost. Despite being right, despite doing her job, despite being better trained than anyone on that base, she'd lost. That night, she stared at the ceiling and wondered if it was time to leave the Army entirely. Maybe there was no place for her here. Maybe Morrison and men like him would always win. Her phone buzzed. A text from Commander Blake. Heard what happened. Don't give up. Sometimes the fight takes longer than we want, but it's still worth fighting. You're stronger than they know. Maya read the message 3 times. Then she got up, laced her running shoes, and went for a midnight run through the Georgia darkness. The transfer request sat on Colonel Hendricks' desk for 2 weeks while Maya continued her duties in a strange limbo. Morrison treated her like she didn't exist, giving her meaningless assignments that kept her away from the recruits. The other instructors whispered when she passed. Even Captain Davis avoided making eye contact. But something unexpected happened during those 2 weeks. The recruits started to rebel. It began with Private Taylor. After he was released from the hospital, he returned to training with a new determination. Instead of being broken by his heat stroke, he seemed energized. And during a formation where Morrison was berating the platoon for their weakness, Taylor did something unprecedented. He raised his hand. What? Morrison barked. Sergeant, permission to speak. Morrison's eyes narrowed. Denied. Drop and give me 50. Taylor dropped and started doing push-ups, but while he did them, he spoke anyway. Sergeant, I just want to say that Lieutenant Chen saved my life. She recognized I was in danger when you didn't. If she hadn't stood up to you, I'd be dead or brain damaged right now. Morrison's face went pale, then red. Private Taylor, you just earned yourself. He's right, Sergeant, another voice called out. Private Jackson, one of the stronger recruits. We all saw what happened. Lieutenant Chen was right, you were wrong. A murmur of agreement rippled through the formation. Morrison looked stunned. In 20 years of training recruits, he'd never had them challenge him like this. All of you shut your mouths, Morrison roared. You think you know better than me. You think 2 months of training makes you experts. We know enough to see competence when it's in front of us, Taylor said, still doing push-ups. And we know that Lieutenant Chen treats us like soldiers, not like problems to be solved. Morrison ordered the entire platoon to do extra PT as punishment, but the damage was done. Word spread through the battalion. The recruits, the young men Morrison was supposed to be molding, had lost faith in him. Captain Davis called an emergency meeting with Morrison and the other senior instructors. Maya wasn't invited, but she heard about it later from one of the admin staff who owed her a favor. Apparently, Davis had torn into Morrison. You've lost control of your platoon, Sergeant. These recruits are supposed to respect their instructors, not question them in front of their peers. Morrison had tried to deflect blame onto Maya, but Davis wasn't having it. Lieutenant Chen isn't the problem anymore. She's being transferred out. You got what you wanted, but somehow you still managed to turn these recruits against you. How? The truth was that Morrison had overplayed his hand. By being so openly hostile to Maya, by so clearly trying to prove she didn't belong, he'd created a situation where the recruits saw her as an underdog. And soldiers loved an underdog. More importantly, they'd watched Maya operate for weeks now. They'd seen her run faster than most of the male instructors. They'd seen her carry the same ruck weights without complaint. They'd seen her treat them with respect while still maintaining discipline. and they'd seen Morrison try to break her and fail. In their eyes, Maya had become what Morrison claimed to be, a warrior who didn't quit. 3 days before Maya's transfer was set to take effect, Colonel Hendricks received a visitor. A Navy captain named Rodriguez, accompanied by 2 men in civilian clothes who had the unmistakable bearing of intelligence officers. Hendricks was confused by the visit. "What can I do for the Navy, Captain?" Rodriguez laid a file on his desk. "We're here about Lieutenant Maya Chen. Chen is being transferred out of my battalion. The paperwork is all ready." "The paperwork is going to be pulled, Colonel, and you're going to reinstate Lieutenant Chen with full authority as an instructor." Hendricks bristled. "With all due respect, Captain, I don't take orders from the Navy. My battalion, my personnel decisions." One of the civilians spoke up. He introduced himself as Mr. Garrett from Naval Intelligence. "Colonel, do you have the appropriate clearances to view Level 4 classified records?" "I have a secret clearance, yes." "Then you don't have high enough clearance to know who Lieutenant Chen really is or what she's done for this country." Garrett opened the file and pulled out a single document, most of it redacted. "What I can tell you is that Lieutenant Chen has served with distinction in multiple special operations units. She has combat experience that would make your Sergeant Morrison look like a Boy Scout, and she has specific qualifications that fewer than a dozen women have ever achieved." "What qualifications?" "That's classified above your level. But take my word for it, Lieutenant Chen is one of the most highly trained soldiers in the U.S. military. And you've been letting an insecure NCO drive her out of your command." Hendricks felt his stomach sink. "I was told her classified record was probably desk work, that the classification was political." "You were told that by whom? Sergeant Morrison?" Rodriguez leaned forward. "Colonel, let me be clear. The Navy doesn't send intelligence officers to Fort Benning over desk jockeys. We're here because Lieutenant Chen is a national asset who is being wasted because of petty base politics." Garrett added, "We've been monitoring the situation. We let it play out to see how Lieutenant Chen would handle it and to see if your command would recognize her value. You failed that test, Colonel. Now we're correcting the situation." Hendricks realized his career was in jeopardy. "What do you want me to do?" "First, cancel the transfer. Second, you're going to have a very frank conversation with Sergeant Morrison about his conduct. Third, you're going to give Lieutenant Chen the authority to implement her own training program for 1 platoon. We want to see what she can do when she's not being undermined." "And if I refuse?" The 2 men exchanged glances. "Then we'll have a conversation with your commanding general about why you allowed a hostile work environment to drive out one of the most qualified special operations personnel in the Department of Defense. How do you think that will go, Colonel?" Hendricks knew when he was beaten. "I'll make the necessary changes." After the visitors left, Hendricks sat alone in his office for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called Morrison to his office. The conversation that followed was not pleasant. Morrison tried to defend himself, tried to explain that he was just maintaining standards, that Maya's presence had disrupted his program. Hendricks cut him off. "Sergeant, I just had Navy intelligence in my office. Do you know what they told me? They told me that Lieutenant Chen is one of the most highly trained soldiers in the U.S. military. They told me that her classified record contains achievements that neither you nor I have the clearance to even know about. And they told me that we've been treating her like garbage because of your ego." Morrison's face went white. "Sir, I didn't know." "You didn't want to know. You decided she didn't belong before she even arrived. And because I trusted your judgment, I went along with it." Hendricks stood up, his own anger rising. "Let me tell you what's going to happen now. You are going to apologize to Lieutenant Chen. You are going to support her training program. And you are going to demonstrate professional behavior, or I will end your career. Am I clear?" "Yes, sir," Morrison said quietly. Dismissed. After Morrison left, Hendricks called Maya to his office. When she arrived, he could see the weariness in her eyes. She expected more bad news. "Lieutenant Chen, your transfer has been canceled." Maya's expression didn't change. "Sir." I've been informed by higher authorities that I made a serious error in judgment regarding your qualifications and value to this command. I'm reinstating you as a full instructor with authority to implement your own training protocols for one platoon." Maya was silent for a moment, processing. "May I ask what changed, sir?" "Let's just say that some people with more stars than me made it clear that you're not who I thought you were." Hendricks met her eyes. "I owe you an apology, Lieutenant. I let bias and bad information cloud my judgment. That was wrong." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet. You're going to have to prove that you can train soldiers better than Morrison. He's been doing this for 20 years. You'll have 10 weeks with one platoon to show results. If your methods work, I'll consider expanding your role. If they don't, well, we'll revisit the transfer." "That's fair, sir." After Maya left, Hendricks hoped he'd made the right decision. He still didn't know what was in her classified record, but the Navy's involvement had shaken him. Whoever Maya Chen really was, she clearly had powerful allies. What Hendricks didn't know was that Maya hadn't asked for any of this. Commander Blake had made calls on her own, frustrated by watching her former protege being mistreated. Blake had reached out to her contacts in naval intelligence, who decided that Maya's treatment at Fort Benning was both unjust and a waste of talent. When Maya found out, she was initially angry. She'd wanted to succeed on her own merits, not because of intervention from above. But Blake had been blunt in her response. "You were succeeding on your merits. You beat their obstacle course. You saved a recruit's life. You did everything right. But men like Morrison don't care about merit. They care about protecting their territory. Sometimes you need allies to fight that battle." Maya had to admit Blake was right. The next morning, Morrison appeared outside Maya's office. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "Lieutenant Chen, may I come in?" "Of course, Sergeant." Morrison closed the door and stood awkwardly. "I need to apologize. I treated you poorly based on assumptions that were wrong. I let my biases about women in combat roles cloud my judgment. That was unprofessional and I'm sorry." Maya could tell the apology was costing him, and she appreciated that. "Thank you, Sergeant. I accept your apology. Colonel Hendricks told me you're taking over training for one platoon. If you need any resources or support, let me know." "I will, and Sergeant, I'm not here to make you look bad or to prove you wrong. I'm here to train soldiers. That's all I've ever wanted." Morrison nodded and left. Maya doubted they'd ever be friends, but maybe they could at least work together professionally. Word spread quickly through the battalion. Lieutenant Chen wasn't leaving, and she was getting her own platoon to train. The recruits who defended her were elated. The instructors were skeptical but curious. And Maya, she was ready to show them what real training looked like. Maya's new platoon consisted of 48 recruits who'd just begun basic combat training. They were fresh, scared, and completely unprepared for what she was about to do with them. On the first day, she gathered them in a classroom instead of the parade ground. They looked confused. Morrison's methods involved immediate physical domination, screaming, and shock tactics. Maya had a different approach. "Take a seat," she said calmly. They sat, exchanging nervous glances. "My name is Lieutenant Chen. For the next 10 weeks, I'm going to train you to be soldiers. But before we start, I want you to understand something. I'm not here to break you down and build you back up. You're not broken. You're untrained. There's a difference." She walked along the front of the room. "Real training is about teaching you skills, building your confidence, and helping you understand why you're doing what you're doing. It's not about screaming or making you feel worthless. Anyone can be cruel. That doesn't make you a good leader or a good teacher." Private Rodriguez, a stocky kid from Texas, raised his hand. "Ma'am, isn't basic training supposed to be hard? Supposed to weed out the weak?" "It is hard, Private. You're going to suffer, sweat, and question why you enlisted. But there's smart suffering and stupid suffering. Smart suffering builds you up. Stupid suffering just damages you. My job is to make sure you only do the first kind." Over the next 10 weeks, Maya implemented a training program based on her SEAL experience, adapted for Army basic training standards. She started each day with PT, but instead of just running miles, She taught them proper running form. Instead of just doing push-ups until they collapsed, she taught them progressive strength training. Most of you will never max out your PT test by just grinding through exercises, she explained during a morning session. You need technique, recovery, and smart progression. Your body isn't your enemy, it's your tool. Treat it right. She taught them hand-to-hand combat using principles from multiple martial arts, focusing on leverage and technique over size. In combat, you might face someone bigger than you. You need to know how to use their size against them. During weapons training, she didn't just teach them to shoot, she taught them to understand their weapons. This isn't just a tool, this is a precision instrument. Know how it works, know how to maintain it, know how to fix it when it fails. But what really set Maya's approach apart was her focus on the mental game. Every evening, she held sessions on stress management, mental toughness, and team building. Being a soldier is 90% mental, she told them. Your body will fail eventually. Everyone hits a wall, but your mind can push you through that wall if you train it properly. She taught them visualization techniques she'd learned in Bud S. She taught them how to break down impossible-seeming tasks into manageable steps. She taught them that there was no shame in struggling, only in quitting. The other instructors watched with skepticism. Morrison, true to his word, didn't interfere, but he clearly expected Maya's soft approach to fail. The recruits would get coddled, he predicted, and when they hit real challenges, they'd crumble. But something unexpected happened. Maya's platoon started outperforming the other platoons. In the third week, during a standard ruck march, Maya's recruits finished 30 minutes faster than Morrison's best time with his current class. Their formation was tighter. Their pace was more controlled, and not a single soldier fell out. Morrison's recruits, trained through intimidation and grinding repetition, were tough but sloppy. Maya's recruits, trained through understanding and technique, were precise and efficient. During a live-fire exercise, Maya's platoon scored 15% higher than the battalion average. During a field navigation course, 46 of her 48 recruits passed on the first attempt, a battalion record. Word spread. Other instructors started quietly watching Maya's training sessions, taking notes. Captain Davis observed one of her classes and was impressed despite himself. I have to admit, he told Colonel Hendricks, her methods are unorthodox, but they're working. Hendricks had been watching too. Her recruits aren't just performing better on tests. They're more confident, more professional. They carry themselves differently. The difference was most visible during a battalion-wide inspection. Morrison's recruits stood at rigid attention, their fear obvious. They'd been trained to avoid mistakes at all costs. Maya's recruits also stood at attention, but with a different energy. They looked ready, not afraid. When Hendricks inspected Maya's platoon, he asked Private Rodriguez, "How's your training going, Private?" "Outstanding, sir. Lieutenant Chen is the best instructor in the battalion." Hendricks raised an eyebrow. "Strong words. What makes you say that?" "She teaches us the why behind everything, sir. We're not just following orders. We understand why the orders matter. And she treats us like soldiers, not children, makes us want to be better." After the inspection, Hendricks pulled Maya aside. "Your platoon speaks highly of you." "They're good soldiers, sir. They just needed the right approach." "Morrison's been training recruits for 20 years. What are you doing differently?" Maya chose her words carefully. "Sergeant Morrison comes from an era when the military believed in breaking recruits down psychologically before building them back up. That worked for a certain generation. But these young men grew up differently. They respond better to clear expectations, explanations, and mutual respect." "You make it sound simple." "The principles are simple, sir. The execution is hard. It requires seeing each recruit as an individual, not just a number. It requires patience. And it requires leading by example every single day." Hendricks nodded slowly. "I'm going to be honest with you, Lieutenant. When this started, I thought you'd fail. I thought Morrison was right about you. But you've proven me wrong, and I'm man enough to admit it." "Thank you, sir. More than that, you've shown me that we need to evolve our training methods. The Army is changing. Our recruits are changing. We need instructors who understand that." He paused. "I'm recommending you for a commendation, and I'm going to ask Division if we can expand your program to the entire battalion." Maya felt a surge of satisfaction, but she kept her expression neutral. "I appreciate that, sir." Not everyone was happy about Maya's success. Morrison had gone quiet, doing his job professionally, but clearly struggling with the fact that his methods were being outperformed. Some of the older instructors resented the implication that they needed to change. But the recruits loved Maya. They worked harder for her than they would for anyone else, not because they feared her, but because they didn't want to let her down. Private Taylor, who'd nearly died during Morrison's heat stroke march, became one of Maya's strongest advocates. "Lieutenant Chen saved my life, and then she showed me how to be a soldier," he told anyone who would listen. "I'd follow her anywhere." In Week 8, the platoons faced their final major test, a 72-hour field training exercise that simulated combat conditions. They had to navigate through rough terrain, set up defensive positions, conduct patrols, and respond to simulated enemy attacks, all while sleep-deprived and under constant pressure. Morrison's platoon performed adequately. They made standard mistakes, had a few minor injuries, and completed the exercise within acceptable parameters. Maya's platoon excelled. They moved through the terrain with precision, set up textbook defensive positions, and successfully repelled every simulated attack. When they returned to base, all 48 recruits were accounted for with 0 injuries. The evaluating officers were stunned. "In 20 years of observing this exercise," one said, "I've never seen a basic training platoon perform at this level. These recruits are operating like soldiers with months of additional experience." Colonel Hendricks attended the final debrief. When he saw the evaluation scores, he turned to Maya with something like awe. "How did you do this?" Maya gestured to her recruits who stood nearby. "I didn't do it, sir. They did. I just gave them the tools and got out of their way." But privately, she knew the real answer. She'd trained them the way she'd been trained in Bud S, with high standards, clear instruction, and unwavering belief that they could meet those standards if given the right preparation. She'd treated them like warriors from day one, and they'd risen to meet that expectation. After the field exercise, the entire battalion gathered for a graduation ceremony rehearsal. It was tradition for the senior instructor to give a speech about what the recruits had learned. Everyone expected Morrison to give the speech. He was the senior NCO, and it was his role. But Colonel Hendricks surprised everyone. "Lieutenant Chen will be addressing the battalion," he announced. Maya stepped forward. 96 recruits stood at attention, 48 from her platoon and 48 from Morrison's. The instructors lined the sides. Morrison stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. 10 weeks ago," Maya began, "you arrived here as civilians. Today, you're soldiers. That transformation didn't happen because we broke you down. It happened because you built yourselves up. You learned skills. You developed discipline. You became part of something bigger than yourselves." She paused, making eye contact with recruits across the formation. "Some of you had instructors who yelled at you, who pushed you hard, who made you question why you enlisted. That was their job. Comfort doesn't build soldiers. But I want you to remember something as you move forward in your Army careers. Real strength isn't about how loud you can yell or how much you can intimidate people. Real strength is quiet. It's doing the right thing even when it's hard. It's helping your buddy even when you're exhausted. It's staying calm under pressure. It's leading by example." Several of the recruits from Morrison's platoon glanced at their instructor. Morrison's face was red, but he didn't move. "You're going to face challenges in your careers," Maya continued. "You're going to serve under good leaders and bad leaders. You're going to be tested in ways you can't imagine. When that happens, remember what you learned here. Remember that you're capable of more than you think. And remember that the best leaders are the ones who make those around them better." She stepped back. "Congratulations, soldiers, you've earned this." The recruits erupted in applause, not the polite applause of a formal ceremony, but genuine, enthusiastic celebration. Even Morrison's recruits were clapping, and several of them were looking at Maya with new respect. That evening, Maya was packing up her office when Morrison appeared in her doorway. "That was a good speech," he said. "Thank you, Sergeant." He stepped inside and closed the door. "I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." Maya nodded. "I was wrong about you, completely wrong. I let my pride and my biases convince me that you didn't belong here, and I made your life hell because of it. I told myself I was protecting standards, but the truth is, I was protecting my ego." He took a breath. "Your recruits are better than mine. Not a little better, significantly better. And it's because you're a better instructor than me." Maya started to speak, but Morrison held up a hand. "Let me finish. I've been doing this for 20 years and I thought I had it figured out. But watching you work, seeing your results, I realized that I've been stuck in the past. The world changed and I didn't change with it." "Sergeant." "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Lieutenant. I don't deserve it. I'm just telling you that I'm going to do better. I'm going to learn from you if you'll let me. Because at the end of the day, this isn't about my pride. It's about training the best soldiers we can." Maya looked at him for a long moment. Morrison had been her adversary, had tried to break her, had made her question whether she belonged in the army. But he was also standing here now, admitting he was wrong. That took courage. "I'll help any way I can, Sergeant," she said. "We're on the same team." Morrison nodded and left. Maya stood alone in her office, feeling the weight of the last 10 weeks finally lift from her shoulders. She'd proven herself, not just to Morrison, not just to Colonel Hendricks, but to herself. She'd shown that her methods worked, that her training was valid, that she belonged. But more importantly, she'd trained 48 young men to be better soldiers. That was what mattered most. As she turned off the lights and headed to her quarters, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From Bud S. to Naval Intelligence to the Army to Fort Benning. Every step had been a fight. Every position had required proving herself again. But she was still standing, still serving, still making a difference. And tomorrow, she'd do it all again.